Rob Damron here again. Today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. It's called Up and Down the Ladder Learning. It's something I came up with a couple years ago and have been using it with my students for the past, probably 3 years. It's a very helpful tool to how to learn. A lot of times students aren't really taught how to learn. Sure, you're taught how to do index cards and how to memorize material and how to take notes, but have you ever really stopped and thought, how do I learn? How do I garner and gather new information? Well, if you watch the previous video on schema, you might want to stop now and go back and look at that one. It's going to kind of explain how the units of knowledge and experiences that we get every day, it's always going to be like uploading the files in our brain. What we could do with Up and Down the Ladder Learning is we're going to come up with as many keys as possible to unlock the file cabinets in our brain. You know, it was interesting. Not too long ago, I was watching a show with my kids, and I'm a horrible artist, but there was this little character, SpongeBob, and he had square pants, and he had these little legs and these little arms, which I can't draw, so I'm sure that doesn't look like SpongeBob, but SpongeBob, in one episode, had to act like a waiter and maitre d' and all these different things. And he was running around doing all these wonderful things. Excellent job. And all of a sudden, the one character said, "What's your name, son?" And they flashed to inside of his brain. Inside of his brain were all these file cabinets and all these little SpongeBobs running around saying, "I need a name, I need a name." And they're trying to look it up on the computer in his brain, and it blows up. And they're searching in the files. "I got nothing." They're pulling out all these files that are empty. "I got nothing. I don't have a name." Okay? That kind of summarized it for me, or kind of summed it up, exactly how our brains function. Your brain is just a bunch of little file cabinets all over the place. And you know that if you've taken a test and you try to cram for it, and as soon as you sit down, you start getting a little anxious, start getting a little nervous, little tension builds up. As soon as that happens, you are losing all the keys to these file cabinets. They're locking. So when anxiety rises, you lose your keys. And now, for another example, you're running around the house, you're late. Now you're already anxious because you're running late, you're running behind, you can't find your book bag, did you grab your lunch, you can't find your house key. You're running around everywhere. If you would stop and calm down and think for a moment, the answer is there because you know where you put it. You're just unable to retrieve that information now because your anxiety level is so high. So sometimes we have to stop and walk instead of run. All right? And when we slow down, we tend to learn the information much easier. Before we get into this, if you're reading, a lot of us sit down and read, and a typical high school student says, "Wow, man, I got 15 pages to read tonight." And then they find after about a page and a half that they don't even remember what they read at all. And then they continue on. Pretty soon they're done with it. They close it and said, "I read it," and they don't have a clue what they read. Their mind is wandering all over these different... Why is that? It's because they already have the anxiety about reading this material. They're already going into it that it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. Think back to a time where your parents said, "We're going to go on a trip somewhere." And you said, "I don't want to go." And in your mind, you thought it was going to be the worst experience possible. So you dreaded it until you got there. You were still dreading it. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't so bad. It was a fun experience. It's something that you added to your schema, your schemata, your knowledge base. And you have predispositioned yourself or predisposed yourself that next time that event comes up, your initial reaction is going to be one of dread. Then you have to slow down and think and say, well, how was that experience? It really wasn't that bad. So a lot of times when new material is introduced in a classroom, the immediate reaction of students is, "What the heck is this? I don't want to do this. This isn't any good. This is hard. I don't like this already." If you ever find yourself saying, "This is boring" or "This is stupid," what you're really saying is that I'm confused. You don't want to admit that. You're a teenager. Why would a teenager want to admit they're confused? Teenagers know everything. All right. Recently, and to give you some more examples of this, recently I had a college student, a third-year college student, come to me, and she was very stressed out. She had an art class, and she needed to know not only the artist, she had to know the genre of the artist, she had to know the date in which it was produced, and what the actual art was. So it's 4 pieces of information. She had to know 22 of these for the next day, and she was pretty stressed out. So what we did is I sat with her for about 15 minutes and said, all right, you have 88 items of information. So let's talk about what it is. You have 88 items. Let's look for commonalities. So we had some artists, there were a couple artists that were 1931. We had a couple that were 1916, etc. And the genres. So once we started eliminating that, we went from 88 items down to about 45 items because there's dates that were common. So we said, okay, we got 2 Duchamps and 1 Man Ray, and this was their art. And we started linking. And how she was able to recall all this information, and she aced the test, by the way, was using her schema, using the units of knowledge that she already had. She already had a lot of files in her file cabinet, in her brain, to make connections. This, finally, is what's up and down the ladder learning. So anywhere you get placed on the ladder, you should be able to get to the answer. Basically, what you're trying to do is give yourself as many keys to open up the file cabinets in your brain. You can't, and memorization, you're giving yourself 1 key. If you lose that key, you fail. You can't get in the house, you can't start that car, you can't go anywhere. So you want to give yourself as many copies of that key to open up a whole bunch of different information to get the file cabinets open. All right. Before we get into that, let's talk about touches. There's a lot of research on this. Basically, 7 touches. How many times did you have an experience with that item? Reading it, saying out aloud, just looking at it. That's all counts as touches. There's some research, and this again, this video is not about research based, and there's seven touches to get it into your short-term memory, and some say you have to have 15, I've even heard 20 experiences with a new bit or new item of information to retain it in your long-term memory. And then what we're going to call that is you actually learned it. You learned the information. It has now been put in a file in your brain. Well, that's great, but how do I get that information out of the file cabinet? Let's talk about that for a second. Let's go back to vocab. Vocab's in everything. It's in history. It's certainly in science. It's going to be in your English. It's going to be in your core classes. It's going to be in your non-core classes. You're going to always have to learn items of information, whether they're lists, whether it's definitions, whether it's just terminology. You're going to have to become familiar with it. So this should really be helpful to just about everybody. Let's take vocab. Now, if you remember in the schema video, we did the word large S, and we made a connection to Santa because the definition was gifts, large, bountiful gifts. And who brings gifts? Santa Claus. And Santa Claus, what was our schema or our units of knowledge about Santa was that he's fat and he's got a beard and everything else. Well, he's large, and then some kids say largesse, and they make that into a naughty word like a donkey, and then they're able to recall that Santa's got a large this. What does Santa do? Largesse. Santa brings gifts. They made connections. What we've just done is given ourselves a number of keys. We've given ourselves Santa. We've given ourselves what he's like with his large buttocks. And that will bring us to what does Santa bring? He brings gifts. So we've given ourselves 3 different keys to remember that. That's how we can open up that file cabinet. Now, the way you can use your schema, and again, if it's units of knowledge, it's a whole bunch of information. What we're going to do in the part 2 of this up and down the ladder learning is we're actually going to really get into it using a lot of the stuff that you do in high school right now, and we're going to then apply it using the up and down the learning approach. So we'll see you on that video.